Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions. This time, more trope talk. Evil empires. This is a great trope. This is definitely in my top 5 because it's easy to... Evil empires is a trope that makes it super easy to get the reader to side with the protagonist. Right? Any protagonist. If it's an evil empire, you can get them to side with characters that want to burn everything to the ground. You can get them to side with pacifists, terror. It's great. It's great. You get to side with everyone, and then you can pull things out from under them through the use of propaganda to mess with them, mess with their minds, get them to maybe even start to agree with the Empire. Star Wars, like people. Star Wars is so well written that people fucking agree with some of the things that fucking Papa Palpatine says and does. That his manipulation isn't just working on Anakin and the galaxy, but is working on you, the viewer. God, and also, speaking of Star Wars, go watch Andor, because it has the evil Empire trope. The Empire is very clearly evil. In it, and then it's just it's a well written fucking show. It might be my top 3 Star Wars shows. I think I still go Clone Wars, Rebels, and then Andor. But depending on how the season 2 of Andor goes, it might replace Rebels. Because honestly, Rebels seasons 1 and 2 were good. But it wasn't really until 3 and then 4 where I was like, yeah, okay, I like, right? 4 especially. 4 was a beautiful season. And then I grew up with Clone Wars, so I don't think Clone Wars will ever get replaced in my heart. Also the Siege of Mandalore arc was. Anyways, evil empires. Yeah. It's a great trope to just get the reader, viewer, whatever, to quickly side with the protagonist once you establish, Empire bad. Right, you see that in the Mistborn trilogy. Right at the beginning, you're in a prologue and you meet Kelsier. And it's being quickly established that Kelsier is a violent individual. But we're dealing with a violent, evil empire with an emperor that has perhaps lived for like 1,000 years or whatever. And so you don't quite care that Kelsier is an exceptionally violent individual. You side with him because evil empire worse, right? So yeah, I love this trope. It's not as good. I don't like it as much as Doomed Hero, just because Doomed Hero is fun to mess with, and feel like that one you can subvert Doomed Hero in so many ways that you can't really subvert as easily as like that one can be subverted in so many fun ways, whereas I feel like not all tropes can be subverted or taken in unique turns like Doomed Hero can. But Evil Empires, definite top 5, probably top 3. Anyways, rambled already for almost 4 minutes.
Think fast. How do you turn a plucky band of heroes into the underdogs? With an evil empire.
Yep.
Of course, their enemy needs to be...
And of course, it also raises the stakes, right? Like, when we hear empire, we get images of a thing that, empires are huge, right? So...
strong in a dimension they're not, and nothing says unheroic but powerful like an army of faceless minions in a castle with spikes on. The evil empire is a literary manifestation of everything that your heroes typically aren't. That is, organized, powerful, and placed, and with definitive leadership. Oh, and evil. Now this is useful because it serves as a foil to the heroes. The contrast between them shows deeper aspects of the protagonist. But there's another advantage to having an evil empire, which is that you get to make it powerful in a dimension that your heroes just aren't equipped to fight. You don't necessarily make them more powerful, just differently powerful. And an evil empire is just one instance of this trope. In that case, organization and strength of numbers are unlikely to be assets to the heroes. But this is just one instance of a larger trope used to make your villains actually threatening, which is to make your villain dangerous to the hero in a way they can't defend against or fight. I'll probably talk about this in more detail when I do a video on villains in general, but for a quick discussion of one of the most classic examples of this, look at Lex Luthor. It's obvious that his enemy, Superman, is stronger than him physically in nearly every way, which is why Lex is only a threat because he has the smarts to actually do damage to him. Now, in some instances, Lex is just written as using his intelligence to make big scary monsters for Superman to fight. But that's not where he shines. Lex is at his most dangerous to Superman when he turns public opinion against him. And it doesn't sound like much, but when Lex makes the people think that Superman can't be trusted, there's nothing he can do about it. There's an example of that in the Justice League cartoon, where Lex basically tricks Superman into destroying a low-income housing development. Obviously, Superman had a reason to think he was doing the right thing, but all Lex has to do is decry him as paranoid to the media, and there's nothing Superman can do about it. Sure, Lex has done bad things in the past, but he's pulling a very convincing changed man act, and now Superman looks like the irrational one for a reasonable bout of justified paranoia. And it's not a problem Superman can punch, so there's no way for him to fight it. Now, the strong hero, smart villain dichotomy is a very popular one, but it obviously isn't the only one. The one that's more common in, say, anime is the villain whose strength is in raw power, and the heroes whose strength is in each other.
Yeah.
Alone, they can't oppose him, but when they work through all their emotional issues, they compile the strength to take
Once they've gone to therapy.
him down. I'll talk about the power of friendship in another video, probably, but there's a reason why those scenarios tend to include some kind of protagonisty speech about how real strength comes from fighting for something greater than yourself, or whatever. And in the Evil Empire case, the strength of the Empire tends to be in numbers, while that of the heroes tends to be something like guerrilla warfare and clever tactics, or individual abilities, or whatever. Now, the Evil Empire is especially useful because, unlike the lone villain, it seems monolithic and impossible to destroy. There's only so intimidating one guy can be, but an empire? That's huge. What can one guy, or rather one group of misfit heroes, do against something like that? Well, that's where the story tends to break down, because the answer is usually beat up the boss and win the day without regard to the actual consequences of a cultural collapse or acknowledging the fact that if you beat up the boss, there's usually a line of succession set up to guarantee the empire persists even after the boss is taken down.
Yeah. Which, Mistborn does a good job of. Book 2 is essentially the pitfalls of replacing a 1,000 long emperor, right? Or whatever. However long the fucking final emperor or whatever his name was lived. Yeah, book 1 is the downfall of the empire. Book 2 is trying to figure out what to do after the empire. Book 3 is you've got the empire, you've secured the empire pretty much, and now it's like, what do you do after? How do you make it last?
There's a reason why fantasy novels will often include a rightful heir who can step in and fill the power vacuum when the other good guys finish playing Stomp the Tyrant. Now, the problem here is when you draw on reality, you end up with a situation that's less Prince Caspian and more Game of Thrones. When you break down an empire, you need another structure to take its place. Taking down the bad king and putting up a good one only works in stories, but is unsustainable in reality. You might end up with a benevolent dictator, but give it a few generations and the rulers will have forgotten why they bothered to be benevolent in the first place.
Exactly. And this is actually what I do in my book. In the stories that I am writing, these are the stories that I am currently writing, working on, take place roughly 270, take place almost 300 years after the collapse of this empire that had lasted for around 500 years. The beginning of the empire had noble intentions behind it, with two brothers unifying their homeland, and then they went out and conquered the world pretty much. And the intentions were noble. However, literally within the next generation, the next ruler, not a good guy. I mean, even the first guy was not the good one. It was his younger brother that was actually the better person. But of course, not how. Doesn't make for as good of a story if the good one is actually in charge, right? It makes it better if the good one is trying to get his brother to, like, his older brother, who is not that good of a guy. He's got more self-control than the second emperor. Is certainly a better person than the second emperor, but the first emperor, he has his back and forth. He listens to his younger brother, who is trying to have this empire be a thing for good. Try and make something that is good, unites the world kind of vibes. But sadly, that is not how power and government works, especially when you have a feudal system of government. Quickly, it goes downhill. Um, because, in my opinion, people are innately greedy. I have a fairly cynical viewpoint on people.
Place. So in the absence of a rightful heir storyline, a lot of the time the writer will just have the empire crumble when its leader is defeated. But the problem is when you overthrow a system, you need another one. A cursory glance at a history textbook will tell you that the French Revolution led to 10 years of complete chaos while they tried to sort out who should be in charge and how. See, stuff like this is why evil empire stories tend to stop before they have to address what happens in the aftermath. But this is only a problem if the empire contains people we're supposed to care about. If it's an empire subjugating people we like, we want to know they'll be okay after their government falls apart, so those stories tend to invoke the rightful heir thing, so we get the feeling they'll have some sort of support structure in place. It's unlikely to last beyond the rightful heir's lifetime, but that's the scale we care about, so it seems to suffice for the time being. But if the empire is all evil, well, who cares, right? Sauron only ruled the orcs and some explicitly evil humans. Who cares if their government falls apart? So as soon as his big eyeball tower explodes, all that's left to do is the cleanup in the actual places we do care about. And that kind of evil empire is both safer and less believable to play with, because it's got no grounding in reality. It only exists for literary efficiency. In the real world, there are no purely evil empires, no situation where all collateral damage is justified because all the bystanders were also evil, but fantasy and sci-fi love making entirely evil species that conquer other non-evil empires in...
Okay, so here's the thing. I'm gonna disagree here with Red. Obviously, we know that the meta kind of thought is that Tolkien never wrote purely evil species. He did not believe in anyone being innately evil. He believed everyone was capable of, even if they do evil things, that they can be redeemed. Because, that was his Catholic upbringing. The whole idea of redemption is a very Christian, Catholic kind of thing. So Sauron, of course, by the time of the Lord of the Rings, is essentially damn near irredeemable. It would take some great effort to redeem him, but at this point, really, the only option left to humanity is to destroy the One Ring, and for him to be forever cast away. Or, well, not forever, because the Great Shadow was supposed to return. I think Sauron is supposed to return in the supposed sequel, The Lord of the Rings, that Tolkien started writing, but he thought it was too depressing. He didn't write it. He only wrote like 13 pages. The orcs, one of the theories is that they were corrupted elves. And then, of course, Sauron tricked the Haradrim and the Rune to side with him. However, I think you can... once Sauron is gone, the Rune and the Haradrim don't really, I don't believe, have any other loyalties or any other desires to really fight, Gondor and Rohan. So I think the Rune and Haradrim, after Sauron's defeated, just kind of, their system of government isn't destroyed, right? The Haradrim war was never fought on Haradrim lands, as far as I'm aware. Maybe some battles were fought in Rune lands. No, I think the Rune armies marched on Erebor. Or did orcs march on Erebor? I can't remember. But yeah, those two places still will have their system of government. They just won't no longer have the big evil bad guy that essentially motivated them to go and fight Gondor and Rohan and the rest of Middle Earth, right? Trying to think of some others. So yeah, slight disagree with Red there. But of course, with the portrayal that the movies gave us, it's a little different.
In an easy-to-repair manner, so when their empire falls, the subsidiary good guy empires can go back to normal while the central bad guy empire collapses completely. The only collateral in that case is the population, and hey, we already don't like them. Now, one thing that complicates all evil empire stories is that your heroes just aren't going to be enough to take them down on their own. There's that whole strength of numbers problem again. Even if the dramatic bit boils down to a 1v1 fight between the mainest hero and the big bad boss, you need an army to fight an army. There's a reason why your heroes will generally either join with or start a resistance movement, or failing that, strike up an alliance with a friendly empire and take care of their personal vendettas while the allied army does all the legwork. Now, the most important aspect of the evil empire is the evil emperor.
which is what we see in Andor. We see the beginnings of the rebellion here. Yes, another story about like kind of the origins of the rebellion. But what I like that Andor does is that they are trying. Essentially, one of the things being explored is one of the characters in the show is trying to essentially connect all of these localized rebellions happening throughout the galaxy and make it bigger. Trying to, that's his goal. His goal is to unite all of these little rebellions into one large rebellion. Will he succeed? Who knows, right? And he's also, they're one of the things that they're trying to figure out how to make this rebellion work. Is one of the things happening within Andor. And so one of the problems that comes up is money. How are they going to get the funds to fund this rebellion? That ends up being one of the things being discussed with a couple of the characters in the show. And while that was somewhat of a subplot, I thought it was still really, like, everything was really well done in the show. Oh, God, I just want to rewatch it, honestly. It was really good.
The complexities of the Empire will be heavily determined by the nature of its dictator. Now, there are a few main kinds, so let's take a look at them. This obviously isn't an exhaustive list, but it is a broad categorization that I find works pretty well. The first kind is the Emperor with an agenda. This particular bad guy is notable in that he doesn't micromanage the workings of his empire. Usually he's content to pursue his own dark objectives, like evil sorcery or living forever. Sure, he's doing bad stuff, but he doesn't tend to concern himself with the personal scale workings of his empire. He tends to be bad news for the heroes because they've managed to attract his attention somehow, so he'll mobilize his elite mooks to take him down and or insist on giving them personal attention. Defeating this guy is liable to have immediate good consequences because a lot of the time his control over his empire is at least somewhat supernatural, but sometimes that means he's also the only thing holding the infrastructure together, and without him the empire will pull a Rome and collapse under its own weight. The second kind is the decadent bad guy. He also doesn't tend to have much influence on the inner workings of his empire beyond the occasional gladiatorial arena, mostly because there's likely to be 14 layers of bureaucracy between him and the actual civilians. This emperor is a man-child. He does what he wants, indulges whatever villainous ideas he has, and basically just takes advantage of his absolute power. He's very dangerous on a personal scale because he has no constraints and no sense of propriety, and this is why he's generally not really in charge. His bureaucracy is more likely to be made up of overly ambitious people trying to manipulate the system for their own benefit, but the Emperor just tends towards some good old-fashioned chaotic evil. Taking this guy down won't do anything to the structural integrity of the Empire, but putting a rightful heir in his place could possibly set things on the right course once they scrub out the bureaucracy a little. The third kind is the Maniac. He's completely chaotic, ruling entirely through fear. Do something wrong, he'll have you executed. Look at him funny, he might have you executed. This bad guy is bad news because he keeps his entire empire on edge at all times. No slight is too small for this guy to take it out on you. The good news is, there is almost inevitably a rebellion brewing with a well-thought-out plan to assassinate him, possibly even orchestrated by his own government. The bad news is, this guy probably really likes making examples out of people, so your heroes will probably have to stop at least one public execution. Fortunately, there is no way killing this guy will make the people's situation any worse, so feel free to have your characters throw out some justified regicide without worrying too much about his citizens. Related to option 3 is option 4, the Grumpy Usurper. This is the guy who probably murdered his way up the line of succession and or got the rightful heir, a character who's practically inevitable in this scenario, exiled in order to make way for his ascension. This guy is almost inevitably a terrible king because he's too spiteful and petty to prioritize the big picture. Worst comes to worst, he'll evolve into option 3 as a way of coping with his insecurities about not being the proper heir or a proper ruler. This guy's convenient because his story comes preloaded with the walking solution, the rightful heir. Insert rightful heir A into throne B and you're basically done. Now as for evil empresses, that is specifically female rulers, because these options could all technically be unisex, there are 2, and they're basically hot and cold. Cold is the Ice Queen. She's ruthless, heartless, and likely to order torture or execution without a second thought. Now, whether or not she's a good ruler is completely arbitrary. Sometimes she restricts her cruelty to enemies of her empire, sometimes it extends into a passionless ruthlessness towards her own people. You're about 50-50 on that one. Hot is basically the female variant of option 3 with an added dose of villainous perviness.
Basically a dominatrix.
This one is gleefully cruel and probably runs some sort of slave-based empire. She also might try to make at least one of the heroes her consort. Oh, and either of these options could also be a daddy's villain if her father was similar.
Okay, so the Poppy War trilogy does the hot empress with the Vipress. Yeah, her name's the Vipress. Yeah, but the Poppy War trilogy is so well done. It's a top 5 series for me.
evil. Each of these emperor archetypes come with their own matching empire and personalized problems that arise when they're taken down. So what kind of emperor you use is probably informed by what kind of heroes you're throwing at them. But regardless, the sheer variety of bad guy emperors definitely show how freaking common this trope is, and why. There are so many stories that can only easily be told in the context of an evil empire. If you want your heroes desperate and on the run, this is an easy way to do it. If you want a daring and sneaky rescue mission, same deal. If you're partial to exiled royalty, one of these probably sprang up in their absence. Basically, this trope recurs so often because it's useful and can be developed to an absurd degree of complexity if you want it to be. So, yeah.
And that was Trope Talk Evil Empires. This was nice. Cool. Sweet. This was a good one. God, yeah, I don't. It's a favorite trope, but yeah, like she was saying, there's a lot of complexity to it. However, that complexity is not always discussed. One of the things that I actually enjoyed at first with The Force Awakens was that kind of that insinuation that the Empire was this massive thing. It wasn't truly gone, and the rebellion, while they did destroy the centralized emperor, right? There was still much to do, and they didn't do everything right. However, and then when Episode 9 came out, you quickly realized that J.J. Abrams did not have an answer to any of the solutions. Did not have an answer to any of the questions that he created in The Force Awakens, thus making The Force Awakens feel like an absolute trash movie to me after Episode 9 came out. And so Episode 8 is my favorite of the sequel trilogy just because it actually tries to give a thoughtful answer to some of the questions and some of the issues plaguing the galaxy. Did it do it well? Not entirely, in my opinion, but at least tried. So it gets brownie points in that respect. It tried to do some cool things. I've talked about this before, where I feel like Last Jedi tried to do some cool things, may not have hit them properly, but still tried. Gotta give him brownie points. Whereas J.J. Abrams, fucking garbage. His movie's garbage. Fucking fan service. Not even good fan service either. Anyways, but Andor is really discussing, goes into the whole, we're fighting against this empire, but we also have to consider the consequences of what the galaxy will kind of look like once the empire's gone. Like, what do we do? We've got to think things through and be careful. But, I'm loving it. I love it. I need season 2 now. Anyways, Trope Talk Evil Empires. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.